Namaste and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's growing stature in the world, India's engagement with different regions of the world, India's major partnerships, as well as India's problems. Viewers, generally Indian diplomacy is about close friendships that India has developed with many countries and groups, but this is a special episode where we are actually looking at India's critical problems, national security problems, right across its western and northern borders. Out of 193 countries in the United Nations, probably only 2 can be called long-term adversaries of India, China and Pakistan. So how has India dealt with these 2 countries? How has India been responding to threats and challenges posed by these 2 seemingly perennial foes? This is the focus of this show, and to take us through this, I have a very special guest in the studio. Let me introduce you to Mr. Baijayant Panda. Mr. Baijayant Panda has been a multiple times member of parliament from Odisha, Eastern India. He is a national vice president of India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, a genuine intellectual, writer and a thinker. Thank you, Pandaji, for joining me on the show.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Pandaji, when we talk of national security and defense, there is a spring in our step now. Compared to earlier eras, in the Narendra Modi period, there is a clear shift of gear, and we have become definitely more assertive, more muscular, more robust, and probably better prepared and organized to deal with these perennial foes, China and Pakistan. So your opening thoughts on what brought about this transformation? I mean, my recent book, Crunch Time, I said that our strategic culture has shifted from being defensive or passive to being more assertive, and that we are no longer a soft state. So how do you think, what are the factors that go into India dealing with these 2 hostile neighbors in a more firm manner?
The Modi government has proven to be a fundamental paradigm shift in how India governs itself and how India engages with the world. So there are many factors at play. Let me cite just 2 or 3 of the big ones. First of all, in each of the past 5 years, India has been the fastest growing large economy in the world. We haven't had this kind of a consistent track record, and once again now this year we are going to be the fastest growing large economy in the world. This makes for a dramatic different capability when your economy grows so much. You know, there's been a saying that your best foreign policy or best defense policy has to be centered on very high growth rates.
Absolutely.
Number 2, the Prime Minister came as a breath of fresh air to many casual observers. When he became Prime Minister in 2014, many had, without really looking into it, had expected him not to be familiar with world affairs. They thought he was a state chief minister and from humble background. In fact, it later turns out that he has traveled extensively around the world. He has visited China, Japan, US multiple times throughout his years in the, as a party organizer and later on as chief minister. He's very savvy about world affairs. Third thing, there is a definite change of attitude. There is a change of attitude from an India that used to wring its hands and say we are like that only, to a different attitude. This is a new India. This is an India that can. And you know, I can go on, but just take a look at how we have dealt with the pandemic. It was being predicted by almost everyone around the world that India would collapse because of our
poor health infrastructure,
so many other things. But in fact, the Prime Minister's leadership converted it from a crisis to an opportunity where we created great deal of indigenous capacities. We've built enormous health infrastructure. We became one of the world's largest producers of PPE kits, the largest vaccination rollout, development and rollout, now approaching 2 billion vaccines, and we have helped more than 150 nations around the world.
Absolutely.
This is a new and different India altogether.
It was like an operation, almost like on a war footing. The whole country was mobilized to deal with an existential crisis of such high proportions. And the same spirit, that's how we have dealt with our national security threats as well, it seems.
Indeed, but we saw this during the pandemic, but it was in the works for the last 8 years. Because look at the dramatic change in governance. Tens of billions of dollars have been saved because of the efficiency in governance, because of direct benefits transfer, because of millions of people heeding the Prime Minister's appeal that if you don't need subsidies, then give it up to the really poor one. So this, and GST, the single biggest economic reform in the last 75 years, which means We have the resources today, and what have we done with that resources? When it comes to our strategic positioning, our defense, we have become the largest acquirer of equipment in the world, defense equipment, and now we are gradually becoming self-sufficient because of the Atmanirbharta focus.
Make in India, defense is a big
India. Now, remember, our armed forces were handicapped because for decades, because of the red tape, because of the politicization, because of the corruption, the equipments were stuck. That logjam was broken by the Modi government. And it's not just the Rafale, it's not just the C-130s. There are many new technologies and new platforms that have been introduced just in the last 8 years, which have made India far more secure and far more confident.
And Pandaji, also we seem to be also exporting domestically, indigenously manufactured hardware now to other countries in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So slowly, I think Prime Minister set a goal that eventually we should be a security provider, not just a receiver of weaponry from outside.
It is parallel with India's growing economic clout. You know, although we are still a developing country and still a middle income country, the fact is we have mostly transitioned from an aid receiving country to a country that gives aid to other countries. Look at how we have been helping out Sri Lanka, which has been a victim of the debt trap diplomacy of China and its own profligacy and mismanagement. So similarly, we are at a nascent stage where for the first time Indian defense equipment, Indian defense equipment was not being accepted by Indian armed forces because it was so inefficiently developed. It used to take decades. Now it is not only being accepted by the Indian forces, now we have started exporting to other countries as well in the neighborhood, not just the near neighborhood, but increasingly other areas. So in the coming years, I think you will see India being a much bigger force on that.
So viewers, Jay Pandaji is saying that there is a transformation underway, and one of the big transformations is our strategic clarity about China. China, of course, is been called our #1 adversary and increasingly threatening not only India's territorial integrity but also its space and maneuver to move around in the Indo-Pacific. So there is a challenge, a big challenge thrown at us by China. But under Narendra Modi, there's been a change in approach, and there's been a visible hardening and an opposition to Chinese expansionism. I want you to listen to a very stirring video clip where Prime Minister of India is addressing Indian forces after the 2020 Galwan clash in eastern Ladakh, high in the Himalayas, and then resume the discussion.
साथियों, विस्तारवाद का युग समाप्त हो चुका है। ये युग विकासवाद का है। तेजी से बदलते हुए समय में विकासवाद ही प्रासंगिक है। विकासवाद के लिए ही अवसर है और विकासवाद ही भविष्य का आधार भी है। बीती शताब्दियों में विस्तारवाद ने ही मानवता का सबसे ज्यादा हित किया, मानवता को विनाश करने का प्रयास किया। विस्तारवाद की जीत जब किसी पर सवार हुई है, उसने हमेशा विश्व शांति के सामने खतरा पैदा किया है। और साथियों, ये न भूले, इतिहास गवाह है कि ऐसी ताकतें मिट गई हैं या मुड़ने के लिए मजबूर हो गई है। विश्व का हमेशा यही अनुभव रहा है और इसी अनुभव के आधार पर अब इस बार फिर से पूरे विश्व ने विस्तारवाद के खिलाफ मन बना लिया है। आज विश्व विकासवाद को समर्पित है और विकास की खुली स्पर्धा का स्वागत कर रहा है।
You as Prime Minister of India, after a bloody clash with Chinese forces high in the Himalayas in June 2020, saying that the era of expansionism is over. This should be the era of developmentalism, and he's saying that the whole world has made up its mind that we will resist expansionism. There's no two guesses as to what expansionist force he's talking about. This is our northern neighbor. Pandaji, the clarity that has come in to our thought, earlier it was muddled. We used to say we have to compete with them, but we'll also cooperate with them. It was seemed like a a mix. But after the the very aggressive neo-colonialist type of push that China has started making against all its smaller neighbors, including India, I think it's quite clear now that this is a clear and persistent danger going forward. And the way Modi government has dealt with them, we pushed them back from many points. We have challenged them in the high seas by joining up with other allies through the Quad and other formations. Clearly there is an effort to counterbalance the hegemonic rise of China. And your thoughts on how India has managed the China threat a lot more smarter and with a greater deal of agility and speed and also operational effectiveness of the military than in the past?
India's strategic confusion about China began right with independence. A recent book by former Foreign Secretary Gokhale gives great deal of details.
Long game, yeah, it's called. Yeah.
Long game. Right after the colonial power left, the new Indian government completely dropped the ball. On Tibet, we frittered away every negotiating advantage. On the borders, we frittered away all our advantages, and we ended up with a war which we did badly. Now, the turnaround now is very, very dramatic, because see, China has today become a real problem for not just for India but for the rest of the world, because the West embraced it, gave it a red carpet welcome, and China starting from Deng Xiaoping grew with double-digit growth, which our leadership in India in the 1960s, 70s and 80s dropped the ball. And so from almost a economy that was similar to each other in the late 70s, China became 5 times our size. And they have grown in hubris, they have grown in arrogance. And yes, of course, we have to be pragmatic that we have a long border with them and we had a lot of trade with them. But why did we have to undermine our own strategic interests because of either the border or anything else? And so now the Modi government has shown, yes, we still have a lot of trade with China, but we have taken a very strong stand when it comes to banning apps which are clearly undermining our cyber security. We have taken a stand that the long ongoing Chinese strategy of encircling India will not be tolerated. In the past, we used to just wring our hands and tolerate it. The string of pearl strategy of setting up bases all around India, of using Pakistan as a low-cost client state to keep creating problems for us through cross-border terrorism. Now, we have proven under Prime Minister Modi that enough is enough. And for example, for 30 years, the Indian governments would not respond to Pakistan's direct fostering of terror attacks in India, because Pakistan used to keep rattling the nuclear saber, saying that this will breach the nuclear threshold.
We called the bluff.
The Modi government called the bluff and showed that there is a lot of difference, lot of gap between calling a tit for tat and making them pay for their hostility and coming to the nuclear threshold. And that is why today you have former Pakistani Prime Minister praising Modi ji, praising India for being such a strong nation, and the Quad is a very important part of all of this. Now remember, the Quad represents something, the Indo-Pacific was left to America's whims. Sometimes America would pivot, sometimes it would pivot back. Now this also has another important angle, that it is an alliance, or it is a coming together of democracies. So this is a fundamental difference, because big nations, big powers will all have their interests, but democracies have a fundamental underlying similarity of approach.
And values based choices. Increasingly Modi government is saying that India is a trusted partner, and we are trying to also divert for global investment away from China and attract it more to India, saying that we are a reliable and a trusted partner as opposed to authoritarian and unpredictable player like China. So there also seems to be a non-military and more like a geo-economic aspect also. Now there is this Indo-Pacific economic framework that has been announced, where India is participating in it. There is of course Quad summits have become, now we've had 3 Quad summits already. So clearly the diplomatic and economic statecraft also we seem to be falling together into one piece as opposed to earlier eras.
Let me share a personal perspective. Over 19 years in Parliament, I participated in something like 75 parliamentary delegations to international Track 2 roundtable discussions. And I had the privilege of leading almost 50 of those parliamentary delegations. And throughout this time, I have not heard a single country, leave aside Pakistan or China, but no other country feels threatened by India. They welcome India. In fact, the refrain for all these years used to be, why isn't India stepping up more? We want a country like India, which is the largest democracy humanity has ever seen. Now, this is happening now. In the last 7 or 8 years, under Prime Minister Modi, India is stepping up. I gave the example of aiding Sri Lanka. We've done that with Nepal. We have resolved border disputes with Bangladesh. We have stood up for Bhutan. We have aided Afghanistan. We have reached out and said that we will work with the other democracies, the Quad, which we were just talking about. So the reality is, India is universally seen as a friendly country, as a country which is not interested in expansionism, not interested in stepping on other countries' toes, but to work hand in hand with them, which they have especially seen during the pandemic.
Pandaji, the other thing about our national security approach that I have observed very closely is that we have become capable of using special forces and doing these surgical missions, because earlier it was said that either you stay passive or you risk all-out war or even nuclear war, as you were saying. But in between that 2 ends of the spectrum, there are so many instruments and tools of statecraft, and that I think we are using them a lot better now. So that shift in attitude, and our ability to strike back at the or even counter-offensive. Even with the Chinese, we have done counter-offensives. We took the Kailash range and we forced them to withdraw from Pangong. So it's quite clear that our ability to do counter-offensives has really rattled the adversaries, and probably it is deterring, if not deterring, at least changing their calculus as to how they should deal with us. Because earlier, like you said, I mean, India was of course universally liked, but by these two adversaries, India was also seen as soft and incapable of retaliating. That I think has shifted now.
So yes, of course we have improved our abilities to make these hostile neighbors pay for their hostility, impose a cost on them. But there is something far more fundamental, and that is political will. Even in the past, we have sometimes had the capacity and the capability to impose costs on these hostile neighbors, but we have lacked the political will. Now take for example, a big issue now is about the Kashmiri Pandits. Now their story is getting told now for the first time, because for 30 years there was an active collusion within our system, within government, within institutions like the media, to actively suppress the story of the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits.
And Pakistan was allowed to dominate the narrative internationally.
Not just dominate the narrative, they actually cleaned out the Pandits from the valley, and the narrative is the other aspect of it. But the fact that we are getting attacked inside our own country by state-sponsored terrorism, and we won't even point out to that fact, our institutions will collude in that. This pointed to a lack of political will in the Indian leadership. Their idea was, buy peace at any cost. Let our population get ethnically cleansed, let our territory be compromised, let our air force not get new planes, but buy peace at any cost. Now you cannot buy peace at any cost. You can only have
appeasement.
Appeasement. If you and we had domestic appeasement in domestic politics as well. Now we have proven that you can have peace, you can have prosperity, but not through weakness, through economic strength and through your own confidence.
Peace through strength. Ronald Reagan, the former US president, used to talk about it, and it is not wrong to say that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also an exponent of peace through strength. Viewers, one of the other big shifts that we have seen in the last few years with regard to national security is major reforms in our defense higher management, and there's a historic decision made by Prime Minister Modi to finally bring about a jointness of the armed forces, the different wings of the armed forces, by establishment of the Chief of Defence Staff. Let's hear that historic moment, relive it one more time and resume the discussion.
समय रहते रिफॉर्म की भी बहुत आवश्यकता होती है। आपने देखा होगा हमारे देश में सैन्य व्यवस्था, सैन्य शक्ति, सैन्य संसाधन, उसके रिफॉर्म पर लंबे अरसे से चर्चा चल रही है। अनेक सरकारों ने इसकी चर्चा की है, अनेक कमीशन बैठे हैं, अनेक रिपोर्ट आए हैं और सारे रिपोर्ट करीब करीब एक ही स्वर को उजागर करते रहे हैं। 19-20 का फर्क है, ज्यादा फर्क नहीं है, लेकिन इन बातों को लगातार कहा गया है। हमारी तीनों जल, थल, नभ, उनके बीच कोऑर्डिनेशन तो है। हम गर्व कर सके ऐसी हमारी सेना की व्यवस्थाएं हैं। किसी भी हिंदुस्तानी को गर्व हो ऐसा हो। वे अपने अपने तरीके से आधुनिकता के लिए भी प्रयास करते हैं, लेकिन आज जैसे दुनिया बदल रही है, आज युद्ध के दायरे बदल रहे हैं, रूप रंग बदल रहे हैं। आज जिस प्रकार से टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन व्यवस्थाएं बन रही है, तब भारत को भी टुकड़ों में सोचने से नहीं चलेगा। हमारी पूरी सैन्य शक्ति को एक मुश्त होकर के एक साथ आगे बढ़ने की दिशा में काम करना होगा। जल, थल, नभ में से एक आगे रहे, दूसरा 2 कदम पीछे रहे, तीसरा 3 कदम पीछे रहे, तो नहीं चल सकता। तीनों एक साथ एक ही ऊंचाई पर आगे बढ़े, कोऑर्डिनेशन अच्छा हो, सामान्य मानवीय की आशा आकांक्षाओं का अनुकूल हो, विश्व में बदलते हुए युद्ध के और सुरक्षा के माहौल के अनुरूप हो। इन बातों को ध्यान में रखते हुए आज मैं लाल किले से एक महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय की घोषणा करना चाहता हूं। इस विषय के जो जानकार हैं वो बहुत लंबे अरसे से इसकी मांग करते रहे हैं। आज हमने निर्णय किया है कि अब हम चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ, सीडीएस, इसकी व्यवस्था करेंगे और इस पद के गठन के बाद तीनों सेनाओं के शीर्ष स्तर पर एक प्रभावी नेतृत्व मिलेगा। हिंदुस्तान के सामरिक दुनिया की गति में ये सीडीएस एक बहुत अहम और रिफॉर्म करने का जो हमारा सपना है उसके लिए बल देने वाला काम है।
So this historic step has since been implemented, and we got our first Chief of Defence Staff. Unfortunately, we lost him in an accident, General Bipin Rawat. But Pandaji, this was the moment which showed that here is a government that long due, long pending reforms of the defence higher management which were necessary for us to keep up, like Prime Minister Modi was saying, to keep up with the advancements in warfare and military organization in other parts of the world. We were so behind the curve, and finally we caught up, and now we are moving towards theatre commands and more integrated jointness. So this has been a historic step. And your thoughts on this defense reorganization, because clearly it also sends a signal to the adversaries, the foreign adversaries, that we are strengthening ourselves internally.
The creation of the CDS system is another example of political will and the ability to push through these long pending reforms, because like you said, these reforms were pending, being advocated for decades. And we can't operate in the 21st century with armed forces structuring of the 19th century. And our hostile neighbors used to laugh at us and used to take advantage of this because of the lack of coordination between our different forces. Now with the unified command system, unified theatre command system, our ability to defend India and to impose costs on those who would harm India is significantly more powerful and more efficient. So this is a very dramatic difference, and these all go hand in hand. Our ability to streamline our procurement, our ability to build our own equipment and even export it, our ability to use modern technologies, because warfare is not just on the field anymore. Cyber warfare is just as much of a threat, with the ability of hostile nations to shut down our power grids and interfere with our telecom networks. So these steps taken forward are huge. Now, if you turn the clock back just a few years ago, most analysts would say that these are necessary, but we just can't do it. In India, that's just the way we are. The difference is, after 8 years of Modi's leadership, this is a new India. This is an India that can do everything that we are supposed to do to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, so we're taking the bull by the horn and also taking hard decisions. I mean, that's one thing about this era, the Modi era. You can see our national security, we have our diplomacy also is increasingly focused on defending our national security and core interests, as we saw with the Russia-Ukraine war and so many other instances. It looks like there is this bottom line about what India is and India's interests are, what India first, as Prime Minister calls it, and we are willing to take risks for it, we are willing to stand by it, we are willing to incur in some cases even the wrath of our foreign friends.
Yes, but I have a slightly different take on something else. Now, starting with Prime Minister Modi's first foreign minister, the late Sushma Swaraj ji, and now with Jaishankar ji, you've seen a very dramatic change and confidence in our foreign service. Now look at how we deal with stranded Indians abroad. Now Indians abroad were at the mercy of anybody and everybody if they were in difficulty. But over the past 7-8 years, we have demonstrated, whether it is an isolated Indian who is being exploited by somebody, an employer in a foreign country, or it is 25,000 students who are stuck in Ukraine. India is not going to leave anybody behind, and India will turn everything upside down to ensure that Indian citizens are safe and brought back. Apart from this, you said that at the cost or at the risk of upsetting our friends across the world,
yeah,
I don't agree. I think friends understand that you can have differences of opinion on certain issues, and they also understand that a country which stands up for its own self-respect, they will give it self-respect. Whereas we were the one wallowing in our lack of self-esteem in the past decades. Now, who is really complaining about this new confident Indian foreign policy? It is some of our
not
own
the foreign partners.
It is not the foreign
They
partners.
respect us more now.
Our domestic opposition,
Yeah.
they are throwing all norms to the winds, and they are going to foreign countries and complaining that our foreign policy should listen to them. It's bizarre, but the foreign partners are not complaining.
Pandaji, last word on, is India safer, stronger? I mean, clearly it's emerging as a more self-confident player, and that's obviously a matter of pride for Indians and also respect for the rest of the international community. But going forward, I mean, the reforms have to continue. The people of India are more nationalistic today than they were, say, 10 years ago. They have more expectations from the state to protect them against the foreign adversaries. So clearly we are going in the right directions. What else do we need to do? Your last thoughts?
Indians have always been nationalistic. It is that some of our leaders in the past let them down, and many nationalistic Indians used to give up hope that the right things would not be done in India. And also there was systemic collusion to allow people who don't believe in a united India. They don't think India is one country. They don't think India should remain one country. These were the people that were given platforms in academia, in media, in writing history books. Now that has changed, but as far as India being safer today, I don't think there is any doubt whatsoever. And I want to give one final comment. We've touched upon the Quad a couple of times. The Quad was an idea again which was pending for decades with nothing happening. During Modi ji's leadership,
we revived it. Yeah.
Gears have been shifted dramatically. The fact that India is willing to stand up for a rules-based world where no one country is going to bully other countries and stop the passage of ships or suddenly make new claims against other countries' sovereignty by trying to grab their islands or flying jets over them. The Quad is a very, very important symbol.
And we have now made it a concrete reality. Viewers, Quad is a force for good, and India is a full-throated member of it and is participating in it. We have many other initiatives to show that we are actively defending India's national security and combining it with a more hard-nosed diplomacy that's willing to call a spade a spade. Jay Pandaji, thank you so much for sparing time for us, and it's an honor and a privilege to have had you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Namaste.
you, viewers, for watching this special episode. National security is a perpetual quest. It's a perpetual problem for a country like India with the kind of geography that we have. So keep your eye on the national security reforms, national security domain. It's essential for India's diplomatic and as well as domestic goals to be accomplished. Until next time, take care.